Okay, we are here with Leo Tonkin. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Look forward to talking with you.
Yeah, this is definitely going to be fun. So you created this company called Salt Chamber, and I've listened to a few of your interviews talking about salt therapy. I think it's called halotherapy, right?
Yep.
And your story of your healing, how you got interested in it, and it's really fascinating. I've never been to a clinic where they had a salt room, and so I just started getting into it. I don't know, 2-3 months ago. So Christy from your team got me I paid for the portable chamber, and then I just recently upgraded to the sauna looking wooden box. And I've just been blown away because I tend to have sinus congestion. And every time I use it, just Niagara Falls. So I actually keep a Kleenex box right outside the door.
Yep. Yeah, no. And I look forward to kind of educating your listeners about it too, because, you know, people, when you talk about and say salt therapy, that could mean so many things to so many people. Mm-hmm. And people naturally, I think, have a general appreciation that salt is therapeutic. You know, it used to be a preservative, right? When before refrigeration. Why? Kills bacteria. Nothing can grow on salt. And dry salt, people are maybe familiar utilizing neti pots and, saline solutions, in our eyes. And if you ever had something serious, you got a saline solution. So salt is essential to our being human. And hopefully we can kind of let people know the difference between breathing in dry salt aerosol versus being by the ocean where I live, where there is benefit. People been to the ocean breathing in salty air, but that's evaporated salt that already has moisture to it. So the whole benefit of what you are getting the benefit from of what halotherapy is all about is that you're utilizing a pure grade sodium chloride, which comes from the earth, right? It's in our seas, it's in our land, salt ponds and whatnot, but it's been purified. When you go to use saline solution, they're not putting in Dead Sea salt or Himalayan salt, even though those have their own qualities. This is a pure grade sodium chloride that when you breathe in, to your point, it pulls out, it's absorbent. So if you've got excess mucus, you've got drainage. When you look at we breathe about 2,000 gallons of air a day. And what's in that air we breathe that we can't see? From respiratory to virus to, as we've learned from COVID, but just allergies, dander, chemicals that we spray, fumes, our HVAC system, we spend more time indoors, and indoor air quality is 3 to 5 times worse than outdoor air. So while salt therapy is a great modality, to your point, for a lot of respiratory conditions, and we can talk a little bit how it works or why, there's some other environmental things that are happening in the world that impact our respiratory system. That is part of the issues to address as well. But I'm glad that you get into this. We really were the ones that created that. It's been 10 years ago that I started the company, and the salt booth that you're referring to was the initial innovative concept that we came out with, which was an individualized way of sitting in something for just 10 minutes and getting salted, as opposed to being in a health resort, being that maybe a bigger session, or even going to where this really came from, which are the salt mines over in Eastern Europe. So lots of different things that are going on, but I appreciate the opportunity to be on here. And I know you've got questions, and so be happy to answer them and go back and forth with how we can best educate people about salt therapy.
That was great, Leo. I took a ton of notes from that rant there.
Yeah.
And I was reading about that, the salt mines. I think it was in France or Spain or Germany, probably all over, right? But I think one story I read, it was like World War II. A lot of the Germans were hiding out in these mines, and they came out with the respiratory systems being improved. And that was one of the discoveries.
Yeah, throughout Eastern Europe, a lot are also in Belarus. There's in Poland, outside of Krakow, the famous Woliska salt mines. We've actually have done conferences there where it's a whole underworld, and they have to this day still a health resort, and it's all about respiratory rehabilitation. And that is a little bit different than the man-made salt rooms that we're designing now. But naturally there, you've got salt rock, you've got the drafting of the wind in the underground, and that's how it first started, to your point. And it was back in the 1800s when the physicians of the time realized that those that were chiseling and grinding salt into the salt dust particles, this is what they were breathing in. This is what this is modeled from. So it is decades old, and they started to do some of the first research and studies way back in the 1800s and 1900s. So there's a lot of scientific validation. This is evidence-based, a lot more that can be done. Most of it, to your point, has been done in Europe, in Hungary and in Russia and in other places. And a lot of the equipment is manufactured in Eastern European medical device facilities. So basically started the path of bringing it to the US and North America when nobody really knew about it. And still a lot of people have misconceptions about it. So this is that opportunity. But yeah, that's where it evolved from.
That's incredible. Well, before we jump into the science, and I already have a bunch of questions here for you that came up in the first 5 minutes here. How did you get interested in it? I think I heard you in another interview saying you had a health condition that was improved using halotherapy.
Well, I've had allergies my whole life. I remember as a kid and getting the back scratch test and seeing how you responded. And my dad was actually a physician, and I was getting shots as a kid every Sunday. He would give me an allergy shot, but a lot of it you grew out of. But I still have certain seasonal things, and I get bronchitis a couple times a year. And when I heard about it was more of, wait a sec, I never heard of this. You sit in a room and you breathe in salt particles. And so I was curious. And I had my consulting company, which has been my real career in organizational culture and leadership development, having worked with Stephen Covey with the 7 Habits and a lot of stuff. So strategy is something that I was familiar with, and I started to look at the market, who's doing it. And there was maybe less than a dozen facilities throughout North America really providing salt therapy. And so it was like, interesting. Well, let's create a business model. And so that's how we launched Salt Chamber. And here we are 10 years later, having done about 1,400 projects and being the market leader, both at the commercial level as a business and as well as for people like yourselves who want longevity. They're hacking into their system. You're interested in quality of life and longevity of life. And your respiratory system is one of the most vital influencers of the quality of life. When you can't breathe, not a good thing. When you lose your breath going up and down the stairs or walking along the beach or playing around the golf, all of that becomes a concern.
Absolutely. Yeah. I live in a really rural area here in Idaho, and part of why I like having a lot of different devices and tools, I call them, some people call it, biohacking devices, is that if one of my friends or neighbors nearby has an issue, I can just say, hey, come over and get a treatment. And if it's the right tool for the job, usually they get results. And I've already had a few people use the salt chamber that came over. Woman that gives me IV vitamins, and her and her husband went in there and they felt it immediately. Just a couple minutes, the drainage started to happen. So it's pretty cool how quickly people can respond to this therapy.
Yeah. A lot of people in a lot of the facilities, there's different audiences for salt therapy. So people that actually have respiratory conditions, allergies, asthma, COPD, sinusitis, emphysema, the list goes on, right? It definitely relieves symptoms. A lot of evidence around that. But then you also look at it as a more of a preventive, proactive way of cleaning out your lungs, right? You brush your teeth. Well, what do you do for, what we breathe in every day? If you had a bottle of water and it was dirty water, you wouldn't want to drink it. Yet we are breathing in dirty air all day long. So we have our own filtration system, and salt therapy kind of helps accelerate and facilitates a cleaner respiratory system. So it's not just for people who have those conditions. Obviously, the onset of a cold, there's studies going on with long haulers of COVID right now. You have pulmonologists recommending it, respiratory therapists, but you also have, because dry salt is anti-inflammatory, and it's one of the key benefits, it actually opens up the airways, much like a steroid inhaler without the drugs. And so that's why people with asthma and COPD benefit. But if you think about it, that's why athletes are doing this now. They're using it in recovery rooms. They're doing it to increase lung function, lung volume, more oxygen to red blood cells, better recovery, better performance, better endurance. So there's other audiences that are really starting to learn about this, including children, where it's really safe. And you look at the kids and how often they're getting sick. I have 4 grandkids, and it's amazing that they're always catching something, at school, and pre-asthmatic children. So it really just fits for so many people in so many ways.
That's awesome. Yeah, I grew up with pretty severe dust allergies, San Diego, California, and I think it was an older house, but it was somewhat close to the beach, so I'm sure there was mold going on, and it was carpeted throughout the house, and we had the central air, like you talked about, the HVAC system. So I got hit with a lot of different things. And that's not even counting going to work and, depending on, what's going on. I think my brother had an issue where place he was working, there were like metal shards coming out of the air system or something like that, like asbestos or whatever.
Yeah.
Just crazy what we get exposed to. So, yeah, I actually got COVID for the 3rd time recently, after a vacation trip, just being around a ton of different people. And I kicked it pretty quickly, and I used your salt chamber, just 5 minutes once a day. And that's actually a good lead into one of the questions I had for you here. So in my chamber, like, there's the halogenerator, which pretty much it grinds the fine salt and then grinds the salt into, 0.1 micron size, and then has a fan to blow it into the chamber. Is that correct?
Yeah. And for the essence, it's a very, the components, obviously people know that salt can be corrosive. So the stainless steel and all the components that help build the device, where we build the medical device piece, is pretty basic in terms of understanding the elements of creating a aerosol. But again, it's dry. So a lot of aerosols, like a steroid inhaler, have some liquid ability, and there's like wet saline solution. So it is dry, and that's what distinguishes it from other salt therapies. So that's the first key factor. The second one is how small the salt particles are. And then the third factor is the cubic volume of air that you're filling in. So in that salt booth, that salt chamber, that you have, a session can be as effective in 10 minutes or less. You can adjust the concentration, so people, like anything else, right? You adjust certain elements that you put into your body. Some people respond with very low concentrations. Some people like higher concentrations. What a lot of people don't understand is that there's a benefit to the skin being exposed. A lot of people that have eczema and psoriasis, these particles, to your point, are less than a micron in size. Your hair, just to give you a metaphor, is about 50 microns in diameter. So when you're talking about 1 micron and smaller, you really need a light to really see it a lot, right? So that's what gets deep in. And so it's only 10 minutes or less for people. And that's why in a salt room, that a lot of spas and, fitness, places have salt rooms where they're even doing salted yoga in a large room. So while you're doing yoga and doing breath work, you're actually benefiting by the salt air. Those could be more of a 45-minute session. So it's not that more is better. It's just that you don't have the same amount of cubic volume of air to fill, and that booth fills up fairly quickly, and you can do a session in a few minutes in a day, and just like you do other rituals or protocols that you do.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, but one thing I noticed in my chamber is when I fill the little holder with salt that has the little grinder in it, I don't know if I'm doing it wrong. I'm the kind of guy where I buy something and I just jump right in. I don't even read the manual, which probably isn't good.
Right.
But
Right.
what I noticed is it runs for about 5, maybe 6 minutes, and then it runs out of salt in the chamber. Can I just sit in there for another 5? Because I noticed when I open the door, it's like a cloud goes out.
Yeah, you want to get the right programming. So, those particles of salt are so small, they stay suspended in the air. So even when you stop generating some of the dry salt aerosol, you still have that aerosol in the air suspended. And so you don't need to be going through a lot of waste of salt. So there's different ways you can program it. So you have those bars where you can increase the grinder or the fan speed, and that's what regulates how much salt is getting into the unit over a period of time. So you have up to like 9 programs that you could store in its memory, and we can kind of walk you through, or somebody on my staff can kind of give you different settings to try so that you get the right settings and how much salt you should use. Because it sounds like you're putting in, you just got to put in the right amount of salt in there. So, but
Okay.
following the manual is a useful thing, right?
Right. I think I fill it up to the fan, but yeah, I'm probably running it full bore, which is why I'm blasting through it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So anyhow, but that's what was unique about that. We were at the biohacking conference in Beverly Hills earlier this year with Dave Osprey, who has a salt booth. And, it's amazing about how many people just don't know about this, and, part of this is getting a lot more awareness, which is, I know, one of the reasons why we're talking, because a lot of people don't hear about it, but people are seeing salt rooms, or some being called salt caves, because of how they're decorated. And a lot of them are very cool, with Himalayan salt on the floor and backlights, but all that is for the ambiance. There's people think that if you have a Himalayan salt lamp, it's doing something, but that's more of a myth and false information. It's really, you need a halogenerator. Without that, you don't have that halotherapy.
Yeah, before the whole, blue light messing with our melatonin production and all that started, blue light blocking glasses, years before that, I was using the Himalayan lamps. And I think the biggest benefit was just getting that orange glow, that like firelight like glow, versus this bright, harsh white light. And without knowing anything about blue light toxicity, I could understand that and feel the benefits of those Himalayan salt lamps.
Yeah, but they don't, some say it emits negative ions or purifies the air around. And that just, there was actually a class action lawsuit, and you had chemists and scientists and researchers prove that doesn't happen. So there's people that might see this Himalayan salt in a sauna as a decoration, and facilities need to really understand that there are standards now from the Salt Therapy Association that really keep the integrity in of this modality. So if you're going to a salt room, you want to make sure you're asking, A, do they have a halogenerator? B, what kind of salt they're using, and that they have the right ventilation.
Okay. Do they have a halogenerator? What kind of salt they're using, and ventilation? That's great to know.
Yeah.
Making notes for the first time I visit one to ask them those.
Right.
So one question I had for you, when I started researching halotherapy, I was amazed that there are quite a lot of different products out there. And I quickly found these little handheld units, which are marketed as being more affordable than a salt chamber or salt room, where you just, it's basically a grinder and you just hold it up under your nose and inhale.
Right.
But earlier you were talking about the benefit to the skin, like for eczema and psoriasis. I would imagine you're just getting the salt coming in from all angles. It's actually coming through your pores, right? When you're in a chamber.
Yeah. I mean, one, sticking something under your nose is not a comfortable thing to do. It's kind of like, snorting. It's not something that you snort. You want to just breathe like you normally do. In fact, there's people that we have partnered with that actually do breath work while you're in a salt booth or in a salt room. And because they stay suspended, but also salt particles, if that starts getting all over your house, if I look at you right now and you look at electronics, we tell people don't, avoid bringing your, smartphone or a tablet into a salt room, because the particles are so small. If they get into any of the crevices, it theoretically could be damaging. Salt is a corrosive material, so you want to keep it enclosed. There are products out there that have this thing that you wear on your mask, and it's more of a saline solution. You have another company out marketing what they're calling halotherapy with a sodium chloride brine that creates a wet salt mist. That's not halotherapy. So I do think that there's some products on the market that are attempting to create the illusion of providing dry salt therapy or halotherapy. And thus you see different marketing. But when you start looking at the integrity of it, it really is the size of the salt particles being in an environment that's why with the pop-up salt booth, we wanted to give people a way that was very relatively inexpensive to be able to create a way to get salted. And that small unit that you're talking about, our consumer product, is something that I travel with. And I actually go into the shower stall in the hotel bathrooms, and that's how I get salted. A couple sessions is not going to do any damages during my stay. And usually there's pretty well enclosed. And that's kind of what I do when I travel.
All right, I got to pick one up for travel. I already gave mine away to someone that needed it. So that led me to a question with the salt booth or the pop-up tent. I remember it comes with a small little remote. Is that resistant to corrosion? Like, can you keep that inside the tent? I remember it would just turn white when I would leave it in there.
Yeah, I mean, instead of programming it and trying to eliminate some of the cost of the commercial professional models, we wanted to keep the same quality of the salt and make it affordable. And so the on-off is with a colored remote, and there's 4 built-in programs that adjust the concentration. And you could have that with you in your pocket, hanging inside the unit or whatever you want.
Okay, awesome. So earlier you mentioned natural versus man-made salt chambers, and I get into discussions about this kind of philosophy all the time, where people tend to think that, for example, like a sensory deprivation float, which I have here. I'm very fortunate. I've been into that for a few years. People say, can't you just recreate that by going into the ocean at night and just floating in the ocean? But it's totally different, right? And I think people tend to think like natural is always better. But I mean, to get super concentrated doses of things, I think something like a salt room is going to be much different than these caves, right?
Yeah, I mean, going into underground places, it really is what's called speleotherapy, which is more about cave-like. When you go 100 meters underground, the barometric pressure, the humidity, the temperature, the drafting of the salt particles, very different. And it was in Europe where in the 1970s, the first halogenerator was created. And thus that's what created the above ground man-made salt rooms. And they started to design them to make them look like they were the hollowed out chambers underground. And that's where you started to get these salt on the walls and certain looks. And that's when I got into the business, and we started utilizing different decor elements of being in a relaxation room. A lot of spas have these, meditation rooms, relaxation rooms, and such. But to your point, when you start looking at technology and you look at science, and, for a lot of people, they haven't heard the word biohacking. You start looking at how can we really leverage things that are in nature. And nature is a great source, but nature is also suffering, right? Climate change, wildfires, what's going into the air that infect us is a whole other conversation. But creating a way that people can get this as a benefit and a treatment is, over in Europe, in many countries, it's considered that a medical treatment in which health insurance pays for it. So when you start looking at our insurance model, just turn on the evening news at the national time slot and watch what commercials they are. Pharmaceutical companies. It's about allergies, asthma, COPD. It's a big business. And people, the medical market is all about getting people in a certain time framework addicted to needing a steroid inhaler and such. But if you can naturally recreate some of the same symptoms, I mean, just last week on national news, there were studies that were released and talked about how meditation is as effective as medication for anxiety and stress. Well, we knew that. You talk about sensory deprivation in a tank, very different than floating, especially I've been to the Dead Sea recently, and it's a cool experience, but it's not the same input. And that's where I think you're starting to see the cross between what biohacking is and leveraging science and technology in a way that really supports our wellness and well-being. I was just at the Global Wellness Summit in Tel Aviv, and when you start looking at anti-aging, longevity conversation, what's happening? My grandchildren, it's very, very realistic that they're going to live to 120, 150 years old. And so we need to start looking at some of that. While that sounds bizarre to many people, it's happening.
That's really cool. Yeah, anti-aging to me is fun. It's not a fear of death. It's just like, what's possible. I've spent time with so many apathetic people that just don't care, just shoveling Doritos into their mouth and whatever. And so it's good to actually care and actually do stuff to kind of counter that apathy that's so popular in the world. My little anti-aging room downstairs, I'm very fortunate to have a 2-atmosphere hyperbaric oxygen chamber. And then I converted half the garage into a float room. So I have it could fit 2 people side by side, a giant float pool. And then I have your salt chamber. So those are kind of like my 3 things that I use in that room. And I think that's a pretty good trio.
Yeah. And I'm sure you're starting to see, you got a lot of in the commercial or retail environment, right? You're starting to see a lot of different wellness stores, if you will, opening up. You got Restore Hyper Wellness, you got the Covery, you got facilities that are doing flotation, they're doing sauna, they're doing salt, they're doing cryo, they're doing IV. A lot of places are trying to really figure out that space. What's great is that salt goes with everything. We've got salt rooms in senior living facilities right now because as you get older, COPD is more prevalent. Your respiratory system starts to wane after you're about, in your 20s and 30s. So we did the first salt room in a nursing home in the Bronx, right in the middle of COVID. You have other places that are putting them in. So it really is interesting how our respiratory health, I know COVID put a big, spotlight on it. And to your point, how it healed. I know I had it a couple times. And what salt therapy is, 5 years ago, I actually had cancer and I had a tracheotomy in me. I had a throat and a mouth cancer and had radiation, and the salt therapy just accelerated the cleaning out of my mucus system and respiratory, and was very instrumental in my recovery. And that's been 5 years ago, where I rang the bell and been cancer free. So as a cancer survivor, I know how it impacted me. But there are people that have lung cancer, which is such a horrible disease for people to go through. And this just, facilitates just healthy living for so many different audiences.
Yeah. Were you a tobacco user? Like,
I wasn't,
curious.
no,
Oh, wow.
no, quite candidly, mine was the HPV virus. And that's where I had that in my system for so long, where you're starting to see a lot more people talking about that with vaccines that our young children are doing that typically come from, more of, sexual transmission than anything else. So that was something that from the early ages of me growing up in the late 70s in college and going through life, that got me, but wasn't caught till much later in life, where at one point it started to block my airway and had such a large tumor that's how why I needed to get a trach and go through cancer treatment.
Wow. Yeah. I thought I've read that you could catch that or things like that just by sharing a glass with another person. Like that's just the saliva.
I don't know about that. All I know is it had to do with certain sexual activities that we do on each other in a certain regard. So let's put it that way for your listeners. I might have to edit that out, but that's really where it comes from. Men like Michael Douglas and others typically get it in this arena, in the mouth and tongue area, and women get it as well in their genital areas. And so it is a thing. And young adults can actually take some vaccines if that's something that they're interested in and checking out. It doesn't work once you're over, I think, 50 or so. So you're in that sweet spot of where some people are doing that are sexually active, or people are getting that as part of the blood test panels to really understand their ability to catch that. But for me, it wasn't about breathing or smoking or anything, but having a tracheotomy in you is something that you have to clean out, suction. It was a very interesting process of what you had to do. And the salt therapy actually accelerated a lot of that, because that's where I was breathing out of.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, I remember growing up in school and seeing the videos of the people smoking through the hole in their throat.
Yeah. Well, you see that now with the stop smoking, and salt therapy is a great protocol for people that are going through that detoxing and quitting smoking, emphysema. So absolutely.
Well, this is a controversial question on the same wave we were just talking about, but I'm a cigar fan. I've been into it like 5 years, and I don't go crazy. I don't chain smoke. I don't smoke every day. Only one max. I've tried smoking 2 in a day. It's just too much. And I think there's health benefits, anti-parasitic. It's, nicotine obviously is being used as kind of a biohacking agent now, and there's benefits to nicotine. But you have the carbon monoxide, and you have obviously the oxidative stress from the smoke. So I actually sell ascorbic acid and vitamin E, which in studies, those combined are super helpful for smokers and just lung issues in general. So my kind of thought process is like vitamin C, vitamin E, and salt therapy consistently, especially on the days that I'm going to have a cigar. Like, do you know anyone that smokes cigars and uses your chamber?
Well, I'm sort of guilty. Obviously, the radiation and everything that I had done did definitely impact my throat and my voice and some things, and what I eat and how I need to masticate food to swallow. But I was maybe a twice a month cigar smoker. I like a good Maduro. I like a nice, good dark cigar. And, when I smoke, oftentimes I actually like to inhale it, but I have kind of minimized that. So I'll maybe do a cigar a month for special occasions or for certain celebrations, and be very cool. There you go. There you go. You got all of them. You need to get you need a humidor. You need to get
I have
A
one.
box.
Yes, it's
All
an
right.
electric one. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like to have 100 on hand all the time.
All right. Well, what I will say is that when after I do have a cigar, I know how I feel, how my lungs feel the next day or that night or after, and that's exactly when I salt. So for those, that are still vaping or they're doing things that are impacting the lungs, obviously refraining from doing it all is the healthiest. Yeah, you can create a narrative where it's good mentally and relaxation, and you got a nice bourbon and you're hanging out and having a cigar. So I believe in balance, and I think salt helps balance it out. So if you're going to do certain things, just like eating and cheating and going for it, and going through those times, make sure you balance it out and get salted right. After you do a cigar, that's what I do.
That's great. Have you came across research on like smokers and halotherapy specifically? Has there been any research on that?
The Salt Therapy Association has a lot of the research of the published studies that have been done around the world. There are different studies about occupational toxic dust, bronchitis. There's asthmatics. There's double-blind, placebo-controlled studies on the efficacy on other diseases with salt therapy. I believe there was something that was looked at in terms of how it was utilized for recovering from different episodes of that. And for some reason, I don't have it right at the tip of my fingers, but I believe there was something to do with the impact of what smoke does to the bronchial system and what salt therapy does for that. Obviously, there's no cure for things, but the Salt Therapy Association.org has a tremendous amount of resources of articles and all related to mold, a lot of different things. So I don't know specific that you could say if you're smokers, but I do know a lot of facilities talk about that if you've been a smoker or you are smoking like a cigar here or there, that just make sure you brush your teeth, brush your lungs.
Right. And I do both. I brush my teeth too. I just
Yeah.
recently went to the dentist for the first time in like 6 or 7 years, and surprise, 4 cavities, which I think I staved off with vitamin K2 and stuff for years, but it was just a wake up call. Like, okay, be more on the Sonicare, water pick.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, people are getting, I think over the last few years, what I've been seeing is that the pendulum has been moving to more self-care, people taking responsibility for their healthcare, not being so dependent. That's why biohacking has been up and coming. That's why you're doing these things. There's technology. So I think people are fed up with our healthcare system in our country. I think people are looking for other ways to treat symptoms and stay healthy. I think that trend's going to continue. I think you also have to weed out the noise of people out there just trying to make a buck by making things up. But I think that's where you're starting to see the pendulum shift in people taking ownership of their health. What can they be doing? What rituals, whether that's meditation, whether that's breath work, whether that's stretching, whether that's yoga, whether that's using an exfoliation on your face to your point, how we take care of our teeth and our eyes. People that really want to take it on and live a long life and create and design a future, people need to be thinking about these things before, you're brought to that attention. Most people don't think about the, breathing because it just happens, and it's only an issue when all of a sudden you can't breathe well. And so being proactive is part of that key.
That's great. Maybe one more question here before we jump into the questions that listeners sent in. Earlier, you mentioned environmental factors that cause respiratory issues. So I grew up in Southern California, and to me, any big city like San Diego, Los Angeles, you're getting hit pretty hard from every angle. And I recently just had my first hair tissue mineral analysis test, where they burn the hair and see the light distribution that comes off your hair. And then it can show what toxic metals you have. And there's different ways to interpret it. Some people say if it's low, doesn't necessarily mean you don't have it. It just means you're not excreting it, so like arsenic, lead, cadmium, mercury is a big one. I think these things are coming in from like every angle, right? Like mercury, even in high fructose corn syrup. And, obviously people know about aluminum deodorant, but there's aluminum in melted cheese, and we're breathing aluminum all the time, right? Just like industry burning, they're just the industry processes that kicks up pollution into the air. And a lot of that's metals, right? That we're just inhaling if we live in a city like 24/7.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you've got the World Health Organization saying that 90% of the world's population lives in poor air quality. And when you start looking at black carbon and methane and all of what's going on, that's impacting the air. You have some countries where it's PM 2.5, particle matter 2.5, where literally they have to wear masks, and it's the way of life where they are. So you're starting to see how the environment is impacting it, and why I'm on the chair of the Respiratory Wellness Initiative for the Global Wellness Institute to bring more awareness. I remember as a kid, air pollution was a thing, and we used to have protests and rallies. And now it's not like it's a big deal anymore. But I would tell you, while there is a good focus on the air that we breathe around our environment and what we're contributing to that quality, people don't realize how much worse it actually is indoors. Our air conditioning systems are very antiquated. A lot of them aren't bringing fresh air in. The way we heat the air in the wintertime and what's being utilized. It even goes so far to talk about when you're cooking your house and are there excess fumes coming off and what you breathe in. And not only that, but there's a lot of research about the chemicals that we use to clean our houses, what sprays we're putting on, and we breathe in these particles and they're everywhere, but because we don't see them, they don't really exist and we're not aware. But those are big contributing factors. Dander, if you got pets in your house, just different things that we don't realize could be contributing, which is why it's important to have, air monitors in homes or air purifiers and those type of devices that really have been studied and work are important. You look at our school systems and buildings these days, there's a lot of efforts going on of doing well-built facilities now. You go to certain hotels, they have like certain floors that they have different air and different water, and they have these things that they're now doing. And I think it's something that we're going to see more and more of, that people need to be paying attention to, not just being responsible for the outdoor air and what climate change is doing. And when you talk about California, you just look at the wildfires and what goes on. I think there should be a salt booth like what you have in every fire department in the country, and every protocol after they've been on a call going to a commercial fire that often has chemicals burning, not just forest fires, but all types, clean your lungs out. And so there's things that we're working on, but you can just go on and on about the things around us that we don't really realize, that we're breathing in fumes. We're breathing in things all the time. And so 22,000 breaths a day, 2,000 gallons of air that we breathe, what's in it? That's what we have to examine.
It's a good question. Yeah, it's a big reason why I moved north out of California, and the air up here is pretty good. I always check the weather app and just kind of take a glance at what the air quality is on there. And usually it's really, really good. Tons of pine trees up here, clean, relatively clean water. I'm on a spring. But it's funny, going back to what you said about indoor air being 3 to 5 times worse. One of the first questions I had for Christy on your team, I said, can I just run it in my bedroom, I want to run it all night while I sleep. But I didn't kind of get, that it's more about just short bursts of treatment. It's not really like you need to be inhaling this for 8 hours a day. And that's actually a good segue to a listener question. They said, is it possible to overdo halotherapy or do it too often?
Yeah. So we had an independent study done on all the research that's out there and available across the world, basically. And one, salt therapy is safe. There really aren't hardly any contraindications with it. And you can't OD over it. You can't overdose. You can't do too much salt. I will say that more is not necessarily better. I think it's more frequency of sessions. So somebody like yourself that has the salt booth, or people that get the pop-up salt booth home unit, doing a 5-minute session every day is great. Staying in there for 25 minutes isn't going to really get you much added benefit at all. I do know that when people are home and they do actually have more of a sinus condition, they may do 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes at night, as well, but you can't overdose from it. We have yoga instructors and massage therapists that they have the halogenerator on while they're giving them a massage or while yoga going on, and they may be exposed to it for maybe 4 hours a day because they're in there with their guests giving a massage with the halogenerator on, and it really doesn't irritate or anything. It's not like you overdose. Obviously, you got to stay hydrated when you do salt therapy, and so yeah, you can do it every day.
That's great. Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they hear about halotherapy, they think that salt's bad for you. I think it's kind of an older generation thing, that salt intake's linked with, what is it, hypertension. But I think you guys educate that it's not actually a dietary source of sodium when you're in a booth, right? You're not getting enough to actually raise your sodium levels.
Yeah. I mean, it's a common question that, people say, oh, if we talk about, hey, you should get salted. Oh, I'm on a low sodium diet, or salt is bad. There's a lot more information out there now with supplements that have sodium chloride and magnesium, and potassium, so you stay hydrated all the time. Some say you should start the morning off with a bit of saturated sodium, like a Soleil, where we take Himalayan salt crystals. You saturate the water level to a certain saturation, and you take a tablespoon of that a day. But there's a lot of stuff. But yeah, people that have hypertension, high blood pressure, have an initial concern about needing to watch their salt intake. And to your point, whether the diet and digestive system is very different than the respiratory system. When you talk about the size of the salt particles and what your exposure is, how much salt you put in that grinder. All of that's not getting into your system. It doesn't take a lot to be effective. Some of the studies, without getting too technical, we talked about the size of a micron, your hair being 50 microns. So imagine 1 micron, and imagine you've got a cubic volume of airspace, and that's filled with about 10 to 24 of those microns. That's very small, and when you fill it up in the room, they stay suspended. You're not breathing them all in, but getting it on your skin, breathing naturally, you're not doing a lot of salt intake. So for those that have some concern about hypertension, high blood pressure, low sodium diet, not the same.
That's great. And one question that just came up, if you have privacy, is it better to have more skin exposure? Like go in there naked or in your underwear or whatever, like to have more of your skin exposed? Does that matter? Or?
Yeah, I mean, if you have, there's been studies done that show how the salt particles penetrate the first layer of the epidermis, because they're smaller than the hair follicle, they get into your skin. And that's the largest organ that you and I have. And there's people that have things like rosacea or acne. So if you think of somebody with acne, you get dry salt, what does it do? It pulls out the oil. It kills the bacteria, right? People that have eczema or psoriasis, typically the source of that has to do with inflammation. And so if your skin's exposed, you're going to get that added benefit. So disrobing and being in an environment, a lot of facilities that have private type salt rooms, or they put the salt booth in an individual room, or put a privacy curtain around it so people feel comfortable to get into their skivvies and get in. Great. It doesn't impact the color of hair, doesn't impact your eyes. It doesn't do anything to your clothes. So if you want to get in there just with your shorts on, and it doesn't impact any of that.
That's great. You're getting me thinking, because I know so many people are dealing with skin conditions, and I grew up with pretty severe eczema. And then in high school, I had, a pimple on my face every week that was so embarrassing. So I had acne. And maybe combining like red light therapy, sauna, the salt chamber, just those 3 therapies alone combined would probably be really powerful for all these skin conditions.
Yeah, I know that there's some things on the market where they try to put all of that into one box, and you really need to be careful. Salt and sauna are very distinct modalities. Sauna is about heating you up to sweat salt. You're sweating out salt. And when you sweat, you're introducing moisture into the environment, right? And can you imagine that you've got this wet skin and now you got dry salt particles? What you end up having is salty, crusty skin, and those particles don't penetrate, and you're losing out on so much of the benefit, and to really get the benefit of a sauna, whether it's infrared or traditional, you're spending 20 minutes, if not longer, to really heat your core with infrared or whatnot. And, salt therapy, you can just do it in 5 minutes. Plus, there's salt particles that are getting into some of the electronics and the mechanics of those things. So you got to be careful. Red light therapy is a whole other conversation. And there's, I think, some myths out there. The real red light therapy is where your skin's got to be pretty much touching, where now you have these beds that have red light therapy or different things. So, people just need to get educated about a lot of the modalities out there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, I think you're right. I think, there's different, as we said, different modalities. You got hyperbaric, you got float, salt, you got sauna, you got red light cryo, cold plunges. The list goes on, right?
Yeah, depending on what your goal is. It's interesting. I can taste the salts when I'm in the sensory deprivation, but that's like a wet inhalation of wet, hydrated salt, like you were saying earlier. And the effect is totally different using your salt chamber, which is I'm not trying to get a respiratory benefit from the sensory deprivation tank.
But people do.
It's interesting.
People do kind of think about it. I mean, when you think of overarching, there's a lot of our clients over the years that have flotation tanks or rooms and salt therapy, and salt therapy continues to be probably their most utilized modality as a business model, because it just covers so many people. There's a lot of people aren't going to go into a tank, and look at it. It sounds a little bit weird, although I first did it back in the 70s when it wasn't, it was more sensory deprivation, where you got complete blackout, you got complete no hearing, the water temperature, and, people were tripping out, and going on some interesting rides. Today, you got people doing things like ketamine while they go doing flotation. So you got a lot of stuff out there. You got Colorado now legalizing mushrooms. You got psychedelics and microdosing going on. A lot of cool stuff happening in the wellness space. But I think you got to be careful with how you stack or layer some of those modalities and what makes sense for people.
Yeah. Speaking of being careful, recently on my vacation, I mixed, I drank, those hydrogen tablets. I drank hydrogen right after vitamin C, and the acid and the alkaline made me throw up within 5 minutes. So, so there's definitely a way to have accidents mixing even 2 things together that don't go together.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like there's not a lot of studies. There's somebody that, doing exercise bikes, and you've got models where saunas where they're doing workouts in the heat. And I'm not questioning it. I'd like to understand it better. And so that's kind of when I first got involved 10 years ago with salt therapy. I really wanted to understand how it works, why it works, where it comes from. Is this legit? How are people utilizing? What's the impact? How does it benefit? And I was satisfied, and I'm a pretty good skeptic. And then it's kind of like, how do we educate people? And that's part of this, and that's what we're doing with you. But it works. I mean, I've seen children with cystic fibrosis, CFers, get tremendous benefit. In fact, have stayed out of hospitals, have minimized healthcare. We're doing dry salt therapy for pets, for dogs and cats that have upper and like your salt booth, where they'll go, their dog or cat will go in with the owner and get the benefit. And then we have serious athletes, equine horses, that are doing salt therapy. Their lungs are huge. So we designed salt rooms for the equine industry. In fact, out in California at the Santa Anita racetrack, we actually have a shipping container that's been converted into a 2-stall horse salt room that trainers are utilizing. It's drug-free. We have them all over. It's reducing the veterinarian and antibiotic bill, drastically, and it's increasing lung function and recovery. So they're better performing athletes. And in the horse business, whether it's thoroughbred racers or it's jumpers and barrel racers to everything, it's very interesting what is involved for how this impacts other lung systems of other breathing species. Very cool.
That is really cool. Wow. Yeah, I grew up with my dad taking us to horse races, so I've been to quite a few in my day. And I know PEMF they often use for horses, and I have goats here, so maybe someday I'll build a little salt room for them.
There you go. There you go.
But yeah, my cat's gone in, but they kind of went in and out. But I'd imagine if they have an issue, they'll intuitively know to stay in there and kind of get the benefit.
Yeah, I mean, there's some species of dogs, right? Like pugs, for example, as they get older, breathing becomes issues, and it actually works. We have several veterinarians that actually include a salt booth in their practice and providing it. So, you've got all these different niche markets of where salt therapy is expanding and growing and becoming more aware for people.
That's awesome. Leo, are you okay with like 4 or 5 more questions? You good on time?
Yeah. Sure. Let's rip some out.
Yeah. These aren't too crazy. So you mentioned Himalayan salt earlier, and I kind of went down this rabbit hole a couple of years ago and got really extreme, like only white salt. For years I was using Himalayan pig salt. And then I heard, or I saw charts online, I don't know if they're accurate, of the heavy metal composition of different colored salts, whether it's gray salt or pink salt and whatever. So one of the listeners asked, is Himalayan salt full of iron and heavy metals?
Yeah, it's a good question. The marketing of Himalayan salt talks about how it has 84 minerals, in it, and such. And when you start to look at the analysis of the chemical compounds of Himalayan salt, for the most part, it's 97% of it is sodium chloride. So when you look at this other couple percentage points and you divide that by 84, and you start looking at the word trace minerals, you're looking at 0.0000 something of some type of mineral. And to your listeners' question, some of those minerals or metals, if you will, aren't water soluble. So those sediments, especially breathing it in, is why we don't use that. Now, from a digestive system, you want to make sure that you are getting food grade Himalayan salt, or for that matter, other salts that are harvested, and what they are. In the Himalayan salt, which is actually in Pakistan in the foothills, the redder the salt, the more iron it is. And that's why when you mine Himalayan salt, there's white Himalayan salt at the top of the mines. And as you start getting deeper into the mine, it gets darker and darker. And so there's different levels of some of those elements. And like I said, there's food quality, but the amount of those trace minerals adding up, you really got to eat a lot of salt for some of that to not be okay. I will caution your listeners that you also want to understand where it comes from, because a lot of the salt mines around the world use child labor. And if you're into sustainability and you're into doing the right stuff, you may want to check some of that out. That's what we do.
Wow. And I've heard even explosives, right? Like I don't know if it's a rumor, but C4.
Yeah, there's some mine, they're using dynamite and blasting, and there's others that core it out. A lot of salt is harvested in salt beds, and there's a process for, harvesting salt off the sea. I just was in Croatia earlier this year and was through a couple towns that were making their own salt, if you will, through evaporation and through the sea salt and how to create that. And I mean, there's books on salt and utilizing salt. There's hundreds of salt and smoked salt and salt mixed with things. And, people are using Himalayan salt bricks to cook on. That's a cool thing where you can heat it up on your grill, and it doesn't add that much salt to it, but it's kind of a cool presentation and flavor. There's those that serve sushi on cold Himalayan salt bricks or ice cream. And so there's a commercial side to it. We actually have shot glasses made out of Himalayan salt. So when you put tequila in, you get a little bit of that salt flavor on your lips, and drinking tequila out of shot glasses made out of salt.
I got to try one of those. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I've done the wooden plank salmon, cooking, but not with salt. That's on the list.
Yeah.
Someone asked tips to maximize benefits, like for the halotherapy. Would you say like after a shower, before a shower, things like that, or?
Yeah. I mean, anytime you can do salt. I mean, from a skin benefit, if you're doing it after a shower, you've been eliminating some of your dead skin cells if you actually use some way of soap or exfoliating or doing things. And so when you get rid of your dead skin cells, which we are doing on a regular basis all the time, your skin's going to be more susceptible of receiving the dry salt coming into your skin surface, which is really more beneficial. But other than that, from a breathing, after a cigar, absolutely getting in there. People are utilizing it after a workout for recovery. So they're getting in some real good deep breathing in and oxygenating their system a little bit more. There are athletes that do it prior to workout, getting more oxygen into their system, into their lung system, to convert to red blood cells and expand their breath. So now when they go work out and they're doing a run or a walk or weights or aerobic or whatnot, they're building lung health. So there are different ways for people to utilize it in terms of leveraging it, whether it's from a competitive advantage or a symptom relief benefit. Obviously, at the onset of you having any kind of sniffle or feeling, detoxing after a night out, it's great to do after you've been in an airplane or other spaces to, clean yourself out. Getting that salt into your respiratory system so it can kill bacteria is important.
That's great. I've used it at night before and noticed like a calming effect. And I'd be interested to see if there's ever a study on like if halotherapy puts you into a parasympathetic state, because I know sodium has a pretty powerful effect on our hormones, like with aldosterone and things. So
yeah, I mean, there are folks that do salt therapy prior to bedtime, because what it does for those that have, let's say, sleep apnea, right? It anti-inflammatory, it kind of reduces the swelling within your esophagus and all your breathing. So when you have that opened up, anti-inflame, where it reduces inflammation, you breathe better. So, I mean, we did Tony Robbins. He's got, You know, he's a big guy. We did his salt room here in the West Palm Beach area. And that's one of the things he noticed is that he sleeps better after when he does a salt session, because he's got, you know, you're talking all day, you get swollen gland. This reduces all of that and you sleep better. You often, people reduce snoring. So the oxygen in breathing is very interesting. And that's something that I know a lot of people report. I don't know that there's been a study on that. We did have a few people that were big into sleep apnea and utilizing it for that purpose. It's also good mental wellness, you know, being in an environment where you could focus on your breath, put on, some headset, do some binaural beats and do breath work in there. It can become a meditation ritual and really a stress and anxiety reduction by being in there. So you got a lot of different ways to get some benefit out of it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've thought of putting on a podcast outside the door when I'm in the booth, but usually I just keep it silent and just kind of, you know, meditate. But a listener asked, with electronics, it sounds like from what you just said, it's not an immediate destruction of electronics in the chamber. It's probably over hours that the salt would get in there and mess things up. Like, for example, with headphones or.
Yeah, it could. I mean, you want to be careful of what you do bring in there. Like if you do, I mean, one, I think people should take a time out and not use their phones and scroll, you know, like kind of get rid, don't have the positive electro, you know, try to create a clean space, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for those that do or inside, I mean, there have been spas that want to know, can we have this equipment in the room? And one, from a commercial perspective, you don't want the liability, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's some that even say don't go in with a really nice watch if you get salt into something. So I do think it has to do with length of exposure, you know, how long you're doing it. Salt deteriorates things over time if it's mixed with humidity or moisture. But I try to refrain. I mean, you're going to put headsets in there, make sure they're encased.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are like when you float, there are headsets that are water. You know, that they now have virtual reality glasses when you float that you can be in the salt water and they are resistant. If you're going to bring in your phone or an iPad to watch something, make sure it's encased or put it on the outside of the booth. But, you know, it's only a 5-10 minute session in a booth. When you go into the spas, many are creating more of an experience where they have brain tap, where they have different modalities that you can be doing. You have salt rooms where they're bringing in sound therapy and wellness providers that do Tibetan bowl music or crystal bowls and gongs and create a whole experience with the salt in the air is really cool.
Mm. Yeah, it's a great point that it's only 5 or 10 minutes. It's like a good break from the phone and scrolling and screen time. Let's see, mold recovery. Have you had any testimonials of people recovering from mold illness?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, at the biohacking conference, there was there's these interesting home units to test if you got mold in your house, right? That you take a sample of your air and get that found out. But yes, when you start looking at it, there's really the environment around us. You know, obviously you want to try not to have mold and that around you, but if you're breathing that in, that's impacting your respiratory side of things. On studies, I'd have to look to see. I did find one that talked about the effect of dry sodium chloride on the respiratory tract of tobacco smokers. So I know you asked about that earlier. So I'll send that. So I'll have to check to see about on the mold side, but obviously we have the anecdotal testimonies of people who have been exposed to that into different situations where that helps clean them out.
That's great. Yeah, it's funny. The first podcast episode I ever did for this a few years ago was with the people at Hypoallergenic Air. And I actually found them at the Bulletproof conference like several years ago. And that was my favorite booth. I'm like, this is so cool. Like air filters that actually kill mold and clean surfaces.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah,
it's a cool company.
yeah.
last question here that someone had, is it safe for infants? I think you mentioned pets, so I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's safe for pregnant women and safe for small babies, up 6 months old. I'm sure some may have tried it with, but you want to make sure the salt concentration is very low. But we've got a lot of people, my own grandkids, for example, who've been in the salt booth at different various ages. And we have now a 5-month-old that had a bit of a runny nose that she brought him into the salt booth for a few minutes. And it's interesting. It works. No, it does, but it is safe.
That's great. Yeah, it was a combination of like I did like traditional medicinal like throat coat tea when I had COVID this last time, and the sore throat, it felt like strep. I don't know if it was strep, but that was the worst part. It just hurt so much in my throat, and so I kind of just combined teas with honey with your salt booth, a lot of sleep, and within 2 days, I feel like the sore throat was mostly gone. So it was pretty quick.
Yeah. It really impacts the bacteria and from spreading, and it kills. And it also helps hydrate. So when you have salt in your system, then when you're drinking water, it helps hydrate better. It kind of reduces that inflammation in a lot of other areas. So I've gotten into a modality where I'm drinking a particular sodium water in the morning when I first wake up. And that's really kind of done some interesting things for myself as well. Overnight sleep, depending on how much REM sleep and different ways that you're sleeping, infects you as well in your breathing pattern. So very interesting how salt impacts that.
Yeah, it's awesome. I've been enjoying the nose strips. So I got into those a few months ago, and halotherapy and those nose strips is a great combo.
Oh, I mean, we did a talk with the author of the book Breathe, James Nestor, who was studying some of the deep divers who can hold their breaths for 7-8 minutes. And he really did a dive into how we evolved as a human species. And we used to really be more of nose breathers. And today, a lot of how we are mouth breathers. And he actually did some personal experiments where there's the tape that you get to really cover your lips that more or less forced you to nose breathe, especially going to sleep. And they also did he also studied by blocking his nostrils for a couple of weeks, where all he was a mouth breather. And he compared, and there's some interesting insights about that. So salt therapy does impact how you breathe better, and sleep better, feel better, perform better, all of that.
That's awesome. Well, Leo, this was a lot of fun. Let's talk about your products for a minute here. The one question I had, you said salt decor earlier, and I have on my list your slabs of salt that you can put up on the wall, and I'm thinking of doing that. Like I have like a 2-part bathroom, so I'm thinking of doing that on one part of it. But you're not getting benefits of halotherapy just having salt in your walls, right? It's just more for looks.
Yeah, it's basically a decor and architectural element. There's some people that think if they put it in a sauna and heat it up, or like a lamp, but that doesn't do anything. It is more, I mean, from a psychosomatic perspective of having that glow and that it is a cool experience. Yeah. I mean, we use white Himalayan salt with colored lights behind it to create unique effects. But there is no health benefits. It only comes from the halogenerator. But we have done a lot of homes and a lot of spas, restaurants that have used it as a decor element because it's really cool. So we love, we provide all types of products to self-install or work with contractors, designers, architects. We've done some stunning projects that you can check out for residential homes. Bathrooms, you got to be careful about because you don't want humidity. You don't want steam. You don't want wet because it'll be like, the Wicked Witch of the West and start melting and deteriorating. And you may not put it behind a sink for a backsplash, but there are so many different ways that you could apply the salt look. It's kind of cool. It becomes a conversation piece. And that's why a lot of salt rooms that we design in some of the higher type spas or environments, they're utilizing it to visually signify, wow, this is salt. You're in a salt room. And it kind of works. We have a new concept that will be coming out. So what we do is we are the ones that have the medical grade halogenerators that are different sizes. We have the consumer model. We have those that can be on small rooms and in small booths and cabins. And then we have a larger one that handles rooms up to about 450 square feet in larger spaces. And then we have our salt booths that we have designed and built here in the United States. And you have different models depending on the bells and whistles on some of them and color selection. And then we have our salt decor side of the business. So those really is what we do. And then we help people get into the business. There are some people that have a wellness concept or a spa, or they do massage, or they're into nutrition or chiropractors. There's so many different ways salt can be added to an existing business or getting into a business. And our folks like Christy, who you spoke with, are those that help people look at this as a modality and how to actually utilize it as a revenue generator. We have somebody in the Indiana area. He bought about 30 of those units and he rents them out to people to utilize, and he created a whole business model. So that's interesting. That's a whole interesting way of looking at it. So
that's really cool.
Yeah, cool stuff.
Yeah, I wish I would have bought the booth with the lights, because I've been thinking of how I'm going to retrofit it. Because I have friends that own red light therapy companies. It's like maybe I could put one of those motion sensor red lights, somewhere to where it doesn't get destroyed. But yeah,
by the salt particles, that's the trick, right? And then you want to get it so that it's positioning right up against you. And so, that's where you start looking at, what makes sense of what you do inside of a small environment. And we've got a concept coming out where it's going to be a really cool system that has decor. You could add sound therapy, binaural beats, and different ways, and heated seating and a curved way that you can sit in it, and some interesting ways you can put fiber optics in the ceiling for lights, and you can have frosted glass. I mean, you can come up with all kinds of cool stuff. And we've done some really cool projects with a lot of people. We have a project that is it's being built as we speak at the Biltmore at the Waldorf Astoria in Phoenix, Arizona, where they don't have space indoors. They have a really cool concept of how they have some plunges outside and such. And there's a piece of land that we are actually building from the ground up, a self-standing salt cabin, if you will, a salt room that is built with our halogenerator, some cool seating with some of the salt decor. And that's scheduled to open up in the next few weeks. So we're very excited to be the innovators of all kinds of stuff. So if there's people that are wondering, can I do this? Can I do that? What can I do? Can I convert a closet into a salt room or salt booth or whatnot? There's some requirements to look at, but yeah, all kinds of cool things. So if you want some decor, let's talk about how we can get you have it right in your attic there, how you can create some cool lighting effects, right?
Totally. Yeah. I think Christy on your team said the humidity can't go over, I don't know, it's 40 or 50% or something like that.
Yeah. If you're in a humid environment, like here in Florida, you got to make sure you got conditioned airspace. If you got too much humidity, just like those salt lamps, they start sweating. They start, deteriorating. So that's one thing to just be concerned about.
Yeah. Well, I think one of your coolest products is the home Salt FX home halogenerator. And I think for a couple grand, people can get that with 100 packets of salt and then the tent. And that was so powerful. I was blown away at the effects of that. I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah. I mean, we're very proud of that product. I mean, still the price point, for a lot of people, $2,000, $1,900, they kind of, whoa. But, when you look at that, this is manufactured in a medical device facility, the quality of what it is, obviously there's a money back guarantee and all, but we wanted to use the same technology we use in our commercial and professional units to get that size salt particle and to get the real efficacy, so, getting a plastic thing made in China just wasn't the angle that we were going with. Quality and authenticity is really what we're about. And so that's what we have in the market. And, people, once in a while, there may be we have a Black Friday going on, but this probably won't be published by then. So
I can market. I think I just signed up as an affiliate. So I'll share.
And we do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there's a lot of people like yourself who is out there and educating, and you've got product on your website, and you promote things. And, there's people out there that may over promote, but if you're authentic with it, you use it and it's real and it comes from the heart and it makes a difference, then absolutely, people should get it. People refer their friends to get it. Yeah. Right. It's about health and wealth for everybody.
I love that. Yeah. I tell people 99% of the stuff I promote, I spent full price on, and I don't get sent products. I don't care about that. I'll invest, try it out. If it doesn't work, I'll give it away or sell it or something. But
right.
Yeah. Loved your product. I had a question for you, Leo. When you travel with that generator, how many packets of the Halo salt do you bring? You just fill your luggage with.
Well, the very first time I traveled, I didn't bring the tent. I just bring the unit, and the unit's only like 9 inches tall. It can pack well. So I took a bunch of the individual pre-measured salt packets, stuck it in the cylinder. Okay. And I was traveling to Aruba during COVID for my wife and I to celebrate her anniversary. And it was in my carry-on luggage. And so the TSA pulled my bag aside and they opened up and they were looking at this thing, wondering what is, Salt FX. And then as they opened it and they see all these packets of white substance and these little things, it definitely was a little bit nervous and comical at the time, where I gave him my business card and said, no, this is salt. This is what is used. We opened up, so it is something that was kind of amusing, but it all worked out. But, when I travel, I probably take about 10 of those packets, stuff it in there. If I'm going for a week travel, I only use about 2 packets for a session. Sometimes, and that's about it. And so that's what I use it for.
That's funny. That's hilarious. Yeah. My quick story. This is a little worse. I didn't check my hiking, because I'm in the backwoods. And so I didn't check that I emptied it out before I went to the airport. And I'm at the TSA and I get pulled over and he pulls out my knife and it's like a raptor claw. And he just looks at me and it's like a $600-700 knife. And I was like, oh, that hurts. And just threw it in the trash,
Yeah, that's why sometimes you got to carry around a FedEx envelope in overnight. So if you I've had that happen too, where I like nice knives and I forgot that I had it in my backpack. And I was like, no, this is one I cannot throw away. I got to figure this one out. So
that's smart. So just keep a prepaid FedEx with you.
Yeah, because if I got to put something in, it's like, boom, where's there an envelope? Let me mail this to myself.
That's a good trick.
Something. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I learned more than I expected in this interview. So.
No, man. I appreciate you taking interest. Obviously, it's something I'm passionate about. For people, if they want to check things out, they can go to saltchamberinc.com or call 855-LOVE-SALT, LUV, SALT. And then the salttherapyhome.com is where you find out about that unit for personal use at Salt Therapy Home. And people can check that out. And the Salt Therapy Association.org is the trade association. They do an annual conference. They have great resource materials and education materials and a list of all the research for those that want to dive a bit deeper into it.
I love it. Awesome, Leo. Well, people are going to love this one. And what's the Black Friday sale, by the way? I don't know if you
I believe for the Salt Therapy Home is $250 off.
Okay, cool.
For the bundle. And we have on our commercial units, I think the original Salt booth, which is the lights and sound, is $1,000 off. And The other booths, I think, are about $500 off.
Cool. Are you guys doing any Christmas sales, do you think, for December?
I don't know. Typically, we do one more about gratitude and giving thanks and be thankful that we can breathe. I don't think we typically, because we're primarily a B2B company, we don't really quote have sales because it's more the salt therapy home. And they may be having things, but usually $250 off is a pretty substantial amount for what that unit is. And I don't think it gets much lower than that at some point.
And you guys have the spa tables too, which are kind of fun.
Yeah. There's some cool stuff. Especially when you mix it with the halogenerator. People can take a massage room and make it into a multi-purpose room by adding a halogenerator and doing other things in the room. Like if you're doing a massage or Reiki or body work or stretch or whatnot, and then you can use the room by putting the halogenerator on and not use any labor and charge for a session or combine it. So a lot of cool ways to look at how to use salt.
That's awesome. Right on, Leo. Well, thanks so much. I'll put all the links below where you guys can check it out. And thanks for coming on the show. This was awesome.
No, good. Thank you. Appreciate the time as well.
All right. Stick around as we close it out here.